My name is Richard Joy. I'm the Executive Director of ULI Toronto, and welcome back to the 10th annual Meet the Chiefs dinner celebrating the public sector visionaries and the important synergies across the entire land and development ecosystem. Shh. Your dinner program today, this is important, includes the bios of over 40 senior public sector officials attending this evening. An amazing turnout as always. Looking back over the last 10 years, it would be hard to imagine a decade of more profound twists and turns in public policy at all levels of government, public finance, infrastructure investments, the economy. And through all of this, we look to our senior public officials to navigate the politics and the shifting markets to create a platform for growth in this North America's fastest growing urban region. For this and so much more, to our public officials, we say thank you. And so I would like to now ask our senior public officials to have a seat and be recognized. And if you're not a senior planning official, please take your seat. But could I ask all the senior plan officials to stand up for a quick second, please? In true Urban Land Institute fashion, this dinner brings together the broadest array of real estate and land use professionals across both the private and public sectors to advance the ULI global mission to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impacts in communities worldwide. Events like tonight are why we often call ULI Toronto the home of the industry. As always, we begin with a land acknowledgement. As a Toronto region-based organization, we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, and newcomers in this generation or generations past. We would also like to acknowledge and honor those who've come here involuntarily, particularly descendants from those who were brought here through enslavement. It is now my pleasure to invite ULI Toronto's chair, Michelle Ackerman, to the stage. Michelle.
Bit shorter than you. Thank you, Richard, and good evening, everyone. As Richard introduced me, I'm Michelle Ackerman of the Kilmer Group, and it's an honor to add my welcome to you tonight in my capacity of chair of ULI Toronto. As we get this evening off to a start, I'd like to take a moment on behalf of ULI Toronto's Management Committee to thank our dedicated staff team, our Executive Director, Richard Joy, as well as Alex, Bador, Jenny, Laura, Juhi, and Marissa, without whom this evening would not have come together so beautifully. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all of our table sponsors for tonight's dinner. There are 34 of you, which I believe is a record befitting our 10-year anniversary. Many of you are also annual ULI Toronto sponsors, for which we are especially grateful. Your support has allowed us to do something quite incredible. In your dinner program, we have included several QR codes that point you to just some of the many ways that ULI Toronto delivers positive mission impact, including the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition that we will hear more about this evening after our keynote speaker. I encourage you to read our fiscal year 23 annual impact report and perhaps treat this as your invitation to become more involved in these initiatives if you are not already. As many of you know, this is my last Meet the Chief Planner dinner as chair, with my 2-year term ending on June 30th. It has been my great pleasure to serve ULI over the last 2 years alongside Renee Gomes, Chair of Mission Advancement, and Andrew Garrett, Vice Chair. I say this as a prelude to an exciting announcement that I would like to share with you. On behalf of ULI Toronto's Governance Committee and the ULI Americas Executive Committee, I am very, very pleased to announce that Salima Raji will assume the role of chair of ULI Toronto effective July 1st. Salima is a well-known industry leader whose experience spans the private and public sector divide and is now president of the York University Development Corporation. A veteran of 2 ULI Toronto committees, including our Women's Leadership Initiative and past chair of our Outreach Committee, Salima's commitment to the ULI Global Mission ensures that our organization will continue to build on our legacy of mission impact. Again. I am also excited to announce that joining Salima on the ULI Toronto Executive Committee will be 2 other ULI veterans. Tobias Orwal, Senior Vice President, Tricon Residential, who will serve as Vice Chair, and Christy Shorthall, Senior Vice President, Development, Northcrest Development, who will serve as Chair of Mission Advancement. We have a lot to look forward to. It is now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, John Cassola, Chief Investment Officer at Canada Infrastructure Bank. John leads the investment team and is responsible for implementing the CIB's investment and advisory strategies, including transaction advice to public sponsors, transaction structuring, and capital development deployment and asset management. John and his team work with project sponsors from across Canada to develop project priorities and opportunities for partnerships with private and institutional investors. Please welcome to the stage, John Cassola.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and I just want to say what a privilege it is to be here in this room with all of you. An indication of the high esteem in which I hold you is that anybody that knows me knows I haven't worn a tie since 2021. So it is really a great pleasure to be here, because of the importance of the subject matter, but we are well aware at the Canada Infrastructure Bank of the incredible contributions you all make to trying to run our municipalities and our cities across this country better and do all the things that our citizens and residents expect from us. So thank you for all of that. I wanted to start my comments with that. All right. Why am I here talking to you tonight? Let me just say a couple of things. One, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have done and what's relevant, what I think is relevant, mostly for municipalities. And then third, I want to talk to you about housing, shockingly. One of the areas that I know that we're all grappling with collectively across the country. This is not an Ontario issue or a Toronto issue or a small muni issue. This is something that we are doing across the country, having discussions every single day. And we know it's one of all of your prime challenges. So we want to whet your appetite a little bit tonight, and I'm going to take the next 9 minutes and try and talk you through a few of these things in the hopes that we'll continue that conversation after tonight. And we hope to do that with all of you in the room. All right. So we have massive infrastructure challenges. The premise of the CIB when it was created was to acknowledge that there is no way to deal with those challenges by the private sector or the public sector alone. There needs to be a collaboration, and there needs to be everybody at the table. And that's the premise of the bank. There are reasons why the private sector doesn't step up and do a lot of the things that we want them to do. There are market reasons for that. There are financial reasons for that. What we were created to do was try and bridge that gap, take some of those risks and bring that private capital to the table and work with municipalities to try and think a little bit differently maybe about the way they can get their priorities done. In regions like the GTHA, we have some of the biggest infrastructure challenges and opportunities, I'll say. There's lots of excitement around the art of the doable. And I think that some of those are decarbonization of our building and housing stock, rising demand for clean energy, transit, electrical vehicle infrastructure, and as I say, perhaps most pressing, housing. So I've talked a lot about all of your problems, and you're thinking to yourself, so what are you going to do about it, CIB? What are you doing? Fair question. That's what I'm going to spend the next little while talking to you about. So the CIB is a federal crown corporation. We were created in 2017. We have about 150 people, small office in Montreal, small office in Calgary, but the bulk of our people are here in Toronto. What do? We're active in making investments in infrastructure in 5 sectors: clean power, public transit, green infrastructure, broadband, and trade and transport. Perhaps the most relevant areas for municipalities are our work in district energy, EV charging, public transit, and water and wastewater, and I'll get into a little bit more detail with each of those. But at the core of it, we're an impact investor seeking public benefits. So people come to us all the time, they say, well, will you do our project? And our first answer is, well, what's the public benefit? It's either shared use or has some other public benefit like reduction in GHG emissions, ridership, transit ridership, broadband for our citizens that need connectivity. Those are the measurement that we don't get measured on a return of capital and how much money we make. We get measured on how many public benefits we create by the investments that we make. So we're investors in infrastructure that are stuck or have a gap that prevents it from being built. Anybody who's ever heard me speak before knows that I use very colloquially, I describe ourselves as, if you remember 2 words about the Canada Infrastructure Bank tonight, 2 words, it's gap filler. What is the problem? What is the gap that's preventing your infrastructure from getting done? And that's essentially when we step in. If you can't get it done another way, we'll use our capital to try and expedite those projects. Have I got that? This doesn't seem to be working. Is there anybody that can help me with that? Aha. That's what happens when you put 2 green buttons on a remote and you say, like, press the green button. Just saying. All right. So we'll fill that gap. And the gap generally fall into 2 categories, the gaps. One is affordability. Ratepayers are already paying a whole lot of money for water, for electricity. In dirty grids, that's going to mean cleaning up those grids is going to cost them a lot more. We can come in with lowest cost capital and try and address that. The other one is risk-taking. We will take risks that the private sector lenders will not take, or your regular sources will not take. Regular sources of funding will not take. So I think that is a key element of what we do. So I want to go to this slide here and talk to you about some of these numbers. The numbers are on the screen to show that we're walking the talk and actually closing deals, bringing significant value to the much-needed infrastructure sector. Now, in the next reporting cycle, we'll be at close to 70 projects and $13 billion of investments. I'm not putting those numbers up and reciting them because I want to pat myself on the back or our organization on the back. We have too much work to do for any back patting, all of us. I put those numbers up on the screen as an illustration that we're actually doing deals, and we're actually being helpful in communities and with provinces across this country in getting money out there for important infrastructure. So we hope that sends a message that we're for real. When you talk to us, we'll get the deals done. I want to highlight 2 specific projects to illustrate a little bit about how we work that I hope will resonate with you in terms of approach and results. One of those is Markham District Energy, and I know we have, I think we have Bruce Ander here. I want to acknowledge Bruce, the CEO of Markham District Energy, sitting here tonight. And another one is an EV charging investment. So let's talk about district energy. I know Carlisle's here from Enwave as well. District energy is a key focus for us. We've done deals in Richmond, BC, and some here in Toronto in the GTAA. And so what's our role? You say district energy gets financed all the time. What's so special about the CIB? The way district energy gets financed, generally, is you go and sign up a whole bunch of buildings. You then take those sign-ups to the bank, and they fund the construction of the buildings that you have signed up. When we started talking to district energy providers, we said, why can't you build it bigger? Build it bigger. It's essentially a build it and they will come strategy, because we will lend the money to build it bigger and wait for them to come, whereas traditional funding sources will not. So that's patient capital. That's what it does. That's what allowed some of the geographies that we've done this in and district energy companies to actually be ambitious in their plans in the hopes of bringing on more development. And we've actually also structured our repayment source that coincide with the pace of that development. Second, EV charging. I know that's very topical for a lot of you, and a lot of municipalities are looking at where they can accommodate EV charging. We have done 2 deals in EV charging so far, one with Flow and one with Parkland, about 4,000 charging stations. The only thing I wanted to point out about those deals, which I think is truly unique, and again, I want to illustrate that we're really trying to solve specific problems. What's the problem with EV chargers, and why isn't the private sector paying for them? Because it's a chicken and egg issue. There's not enough cars, electric cars out there to warrant the expenditures, and the cars aren't being sold because they don't like the amount of EV infrastructure. So what we have done is we have funded the EV infrastructure, and we're saying we'll structure our repayment based on the utilization rate of the chargers. If they don't get utilized to a certain level, you don't pay us, or you only begin paying us when that utilization occurs. That solves the problem in many respects. And if the utilization hits predetermined milestones, we begin to get paid faster, and taxpayer money is out of the deal, and off we go. It becomes financeable in the private sector. So that's a good illustration of the value that we're bringing in, the risks that we'll take. And I encourage all of you to think broadly. Think about those 2 examples and say, what do I have on my list of to-dos that might be applicable for that model or some model like it? We are all ears. So I hope that's helpful in understanding what we do and how we add value. Which brings me to the main course of my comments today, and that's the housing challenge. Yesterday, Aaron Corey, our CEO, announced our Infrastructure for Housing initiative, which we very cleverly have called IHI. We have a lot of creativity. He announced that in Manitoba, where we are making a $140 million investment in 2 water wastewater facilities that will do 2 things. It will bring a higher level of water quality to those, because some of them were failing code. And the second thing is, and as importantly, it will expand the capacity to facilitate 15,000 new homes in high growth areas. That's really the key. So given that the CIB's mandate does not permit it to invest directly in housing stock, we worked hard to develop an Infrastructure for Housing initiative which allows municipalities and Indigenous communities to build the enabling infrastructure needed to advance housing developments ahead of the population growth. So that means we're making loans. How does it work? We're making loans to municipalities, and by the way, that's business as usual for the municipalities. They run their assets the way they normally run their assets, at or below the borrowing cost of the highest rated municipalities in the country. Doesn't matter who you are, that's what we're going to charge. And the repayment profile is structured so that we're repaid from the actual growth occurring through development charges, special levies, new water rates, whatever the normal available revenue generation tools are. So very importantly, I want to stress, we take the risk of development timing by tying repayment of our loan to the pace of development. And another key feature when we were thinking about guiding principles is that we structured our program to defer to local authorities, to all of you. There's nobody in my shop that has any expertise more than what you have. You know your infrastructure needs. You have the planning of it. We're going to be very deferential in the use of the money. Sure, it has to meet the program parameters and used for its intended purpose, but you get to decide how to use the money, including building that infrastructure yourself, or even having the ability to on-lend that money to developers, because we are aware developers often actually build that needed infrastructure. Lots of flexibility there in how we do that. So what's eligible? Water, wastewater, and stormwater, transportation, roads, bridges, and accompanying civil work, transit, electric buses, light rail transit, clean power, district energy, storage, and distribution. So I see my time is up. I will end with this. I do want to mention that our Infrastructure for Housing initiative can work alongside existing federal supports for housing as part of a broader federal approach to address the housing shortage. So you may be asking, we got accelerator money. Can we still use your product? The answer is an absolute and unequivocal yes. So that's it for now. Effective collaboration by all of us is the key here. I hope to have conversations. I know we've had conversations with many of you in the room. Hope to continue those conversations and would encourage follow-up discussions by anybody that wants to know more. Thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. That's a very timely update, and it reminds us just how truly it's an all hands on deck kind of moment that we're in, and to see institutions like yours moving forward as you are is as I said, extremely timely. Luke, come on up. We have one last speaker who's going to briefly speak to one of the many initiatives that you'll find as Michelle Ackerman made note in your dinner program. There's many initiatives that dinners like tonight support. And one that I could not be more proud of is that ULI is the secretariat of the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition that's in its relative infancy, but it's at a very advanced state nonetheless. A lot of companies have signed on to, and really important, if I can ask just tables in the back, if you can just give undivided attention to this last little piece, and then we're into dinner, and there'll be lots of time to talk amongst yourselves. We'll have a whole hour. So with this, I want to now invite Luke Anderson, the Executive Director of the Stopgap Foundation, but more important to me is the co-chair of the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition. Once again, that an initiative that ULI is the proud secretariat of. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. All right. Question. Raise your hand if you have flat panel light switches in your home. Those flat panel light switches, okay. Some, all right. Raise your hand if you have door levers in your homes instead of knobs. Okay. Really, a lot of knobs out there. Raise your hand if you use an electric toothbrush. Okay, nice. Give the person beside you a fist bump if you've ever used an automatic door opener. Person beside you, give them a fist bump. All right, some fist bumps, loving it. If you've ever used voice recognition, give the person to the other side of you a high five. Yeah, all right. High fives are my thing. That's how I usually sign off on my emails. All right, and clink the glass in front of you if you have a touch screen phone. I want to hear this. Like, there can't be flip phones out there anymore. I want to hear this room light up with clinks. There'll be more opportunity for clinks in a minute. Anyway, all of these products were originally designed to help empower and make life easier for someone with a disability. So my question here is, if there's such a strong evidence, for proving the value of designing things inclusively, my question is, why do we continue to build our homes and more broadly our communities in a way that really doesn't meet everybody's needs? Let's hold that question. Additionally, in 2010, Canada ratified the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which encourages governments to recognize the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live independently and in the community with choices equal to others. In 2019, the Government of Canada enshrined housing as a human right in the National Housing Strategy Act. And also in 2019, the Accessible Canada Act came into force. Its purpose to create a Canada that's fully barrier-free by January 1st, 2040. We have evidence of the value of accessibility and laws that mandate it, yet Stats Can reports that at least 13% of those with physical disabilities were unable to obtain the accessibility features and aids they need in their homes. When we extend the scope of this issue and look at it through the lens of visitability, so being able to visit homes, 95% of homes in the US were not fully visitable for people with physical disabilities. I love inviting people over to my house, but this percentage really mirrors my experience when encountering barriers trying to access families' homes and my friends' homes. So I think that this number really mirrors more broadly what we experience here in Canada. We all know about our aging population. You may even have parents that are experiencing a shift in the way that they're able to move around their homes and their communities. I'm seeing some heads nod. As of 2022, 27% of Canadians identify as experiencing some type of disability. We're all going to need to rely on some form of barrier-free amenity at some point in our lives, whether it's due to a sprained ankle, we become parents and need to push strollers around for our children. Maybe we get a job where we need to use a cart to bring heavy packages in and out of spaces, or simply due to the natural aging process. At some point in our lives, we're all going to need to rely on some form of barrier-free amenity. Accessibility really benefits all of us. So back to my question. Why do we continue to build homes and more broadly our communities in a way that really doesn't meet all of our needs? Well, there's some issues, there's some reasons for this that are bubbling up. There's a lack of understanding about the lived experiences of people with disabilities. Our current building codes are inadequate, and deciding which of the other accessibility standards that are out there are kind of hard to navigate and confusing to make sense of. And there's this myth that accessible housing is more expensive. All of this, combined with the need to build more homes rapidly, poses a really serious concern. Without raising awareness, without clarity on what accessibility standards to use, and without demystifying these common judgments around accessibility being more expensive, we're simply going to end up building new homes and communities that really don't work. So, in the fall of 2022, the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition was formed to bring community organizations and members of the real estate industry together to address the lack of supply of accessible housing. You can click your glasses again there. All right, nice. Okay, love it. Tonight, we invite you, the planners, to join our community of now more than 45 members. There's no cost. All we're looking for is a statement of support from your organization. Your expertise in policy, zoning, and land use regulation, community engagement, technology, and transportation is integral to removing barriers and creating inclusive communities. Together with my fellow co-chair, Heidi Green from RioCan, Linda Weichel, and ULI as Secretariat, we're inviting members to contribute resources to our growing accessibility toolbox. Join in on fun educational events and webinars and visits to accessible homes so you really get an understanding of what an accessible home is like, and contribute to one of our subcommittees. In 2002, I sustained a life-changing spinal cord injury. In a split second, my life completely changed as I knew it, and I was all of a sudden introduced to a world that's really not well suited for someone that uses a wheelchair. Accessibility was the farthest thing off of my radar. And this might be an experience that's relatable for you, that the importance of accessibility might not be something that you've ever thought about. And that's okay. We're all on our own learning journey, and wherever you and your organization are at, we would love to have you join us. In your program, there's a QR code that'll direct you to information about the Accelerating Accessibility Coalition, including how to submit your statement of support. There's a link to current members' statements, and I really encourage you to give them a read because I think you'll find them really inspiring and motivating. Tonight, at your tables, consider including accessibility in your discussions. And remember, wherever you and your organization are at in your learning journey, we welcome you. We need you. Together, we can make our homes, our communities, and our country more inclusive and establish a societal understanding that it's really the places that we live, that we learn, that we travel in, that are disabling. You can clink your glasses again. Thank you. Enjoy your dinner. Happy discussing.
My name is Andrew Garrett, Senior Principal of Real Estate Portfolio at IMCO and Vice Chair of ULI Toronto. We now turn to the final part of our program, our Senior Public Officials panel, who I have the pleasure to introduce. And our panelists are up here. We have Steve Robichaud, Chief Planner and Director of Planning, City of Hamilton. Arvind Prasad, Commissioner, Development Services, City of Markham. Paul Freeman, Chief Planner, the Regional Municipality of York. And Carly Bowman, Director, Community Planning, Toronto and East District, City of Toronto. We have our moderator as well, Sabine here.
Well, you know, this may have all been a bit of a big mistake. I was talking to Richard, and he called, and he often does, and he said, Sabine, I wonder if you can help me with this transition I'm planning. And I said, oh my God, Richard, like, I would be so honored. Like, I had no idea. You didn't tell me. Like I didn't know. And I said, look, have you told anyone else? And he says, my board. And I said, well, you know, that's so Richard. You know, he loves the ULI so much. Most of us come out to our family. Of course he'd come out to the board. You know, he'd put the ULI first. And I said, have you told anyone else? He said, yeah, just a few planners, you know. He said, it's all about the underground infrastructure. And I said, oh yeah, I know. It is all about the underground infrastructure. You know, I was listening to John Casola talk about, you know, what are the gaps in your infrastructure? Let me tell you about the gaps in my infrastructure. And so anyway, he says, so I want you to make it fun. I said, there's nothing fun about it. And I said, wait a minute, what do you want me to make fun? And he says, the Meet the Chiefs planning dinner. I said, wait a minute, you want me to make talking to 4 planners about housing in Ontario fun for a bunch of people who've had a couple of bottles of wine and who take their role models from the Waterloo planning dinner? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, could I interest you actually in a gender transition? That might be easier. But anyway, I wound up here instead. So we have a very good panel. And you know how we've heard that this is the 10th anniversary? And we thought, well, and by the way, how many were here for the first dinner 10 years ago? Yeah, so quite a few. But I think it's quite remarkable how this event has grown. And I think it's also remarkable how this organization, ULI, has grown and how people's commitment to it is manifest in so many awesome things like what we heard about earlier with the accessibility commitments. And there's so much that ULI does that's great. But, we all know that right now, basically, we are facing something of a crisis in housing in the province of Ontario. And we all know that there is this deadline of about 10 years. And so it made me think, well, in the same amount of time that has passed since the first dinner, that's the amount of time that we have to build, 1.5 million homes. And so Richard, he said, Sabine, the brand is joy. Richard, joy, get it? Let's not talk about what'll keep it from happening. Let's talk about what will make it happen. Let's talk about what it is that's going to make this 1.5 million work. So I've asked the panel to start off, and I'm going to start with Steve. Steve, it's 10 years from now, and we're having this valedictory. And we say, thank God we started on this course 10 years ago, because as a result, we've had a lot of success. What do you think we'll be talking about in 10 years if we're talking about our success?
Thank you. Stability. We've had a lot of change in the planning process over the last 2 to 4 years. Sustainable infrastructure funding, regardless of what that model is, so that we know what we are planning for and how we deliver that infrastructure with a sustainable financial model. Current and up-to-date zoning that is based on what's mission critical as opposed to is nice but not necessarily important, so that it is flexible and nimble zoning. And then the fourth one is the use of technology for routine administrative low-risk tasks, such as building permits, so that people can actually get on with construction and not spending a lot of time in City Hall trying to obtain their approvals or chasing pieces of paper down. And then we're seeing in smaller municipalities across, especially out west, they are adopting AI and other technology improvements in order to streamline their processes, simply because it's a response to a shortage of staff and resources to deliver those services. So I think those four things would make a big difference in delivering housing in a timely fashion.
Right. So that's what we... So that's what we can do in the first year. What are we going to work in the second year? Carly, can I call on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking about this theme with my colleagues on the way to the office, and I was saying that 10 years from now, I will know that we've achieved success in solving the housing crisis if my kids aren't living in my basement. They can afford to rent a place somewhere else. So that's my immediate at-home indicator. But more broadly, for the City of Toronto, I'm imagining that we've continued to evolve into a successful and inclusive city. And that's going to be a team effort still, with 3 levels of government involved, keeping a clear focus on directing funding towards really rapidly developing good quality affordable housing. Picking up on the point from my colleague, infrastructure is a key theme here. So for the City of Toronto, 10 years from now, we will continue to invest in hard infrastructure, and we will have expedited decision making. That is a key theme. So good quality development moves quickly through the pipeline to delivery. And then the thing that I would add to that is leveraging city assets as well. So using what we have and really leading the way in housing delivery. Another thought that I want to include is growing our partnerships with the nonprofit and cooperative housing sector. I know I was really inspired by some of the remarks at the start of our evening tonight. We're working on bringing an equity lens to housing. And for the City of Toronto, we're really thinking about how we can use this program also to advance truth, justice, and reconciliation. And then I was thinking about who we're speaking with tonight. So the development industry, you will have delivered to and continue to deliver. You're moving really quickly through that initial discussion into an application and towards an approval, having good conversations with your communities along the way. And I really hope that we keep actioning approvals to build good quality projects, because that's what we need for housing across the spectrum. 10 years from now, Toronto could have 3.5 million people in it if things continue the way that we're trending. And lots of those people are going to be moving from their workplaces and their homes by transit. So that's another key indicator, hard and soft infrastructure to support people in their complete communities.
Great. And, you know, I know a lot of us would really appreciate that sense of partnership that you invoked when you were talking about working with the sector. I mean, the we, they thing, it just doesn't cut it, and won't cut it in the future. Paul, over to you.
So I'll get to housing in a second, but you know, at our table, we talked about what we talked about, you know, probably 10 years ago, and we're talking about today, and probably again in 10 years. We're probably talking about the growth plan, whether there'll be a growth plan, or whether there'll be a green belt. What about the green belt? There's always lots of things that come through our career. Housing is so important, though, and it's going to take not just one level of government or not just one group or one solution. It's going to take a myriad of solutions in all levels of government. We can't just rely on supply alone. We're going to have to focus on affordability and some of the other factors. And I think we're just starting to see a little bit of more of that now with, you know, tax rates are being reduced for purpose-built rental. All levels of government, we've got to get the federal government and the provincial government into programs and initiatives that are really going to spur on development. I'd like to think that the municipalities and the developers are working really well. Wouldn't it be nice to have complete applications right at the get-go? We have our zoning bylaws all up to date for permissions right across the board, and we can move forward. The other thing we have to really keep our eye on is the infrastructure, and coming from an upper tier, just thinking about that infrastructure that's going to enable the housing to be built. It's really important, and we have to get that right, as well as the financial side of that.
Great. Arvin?
Well, you know, I guess I hate to beat a dead horse, but it is about infrastructure. From my perspective, I'm very happy yesterday to hear that the provincial government in the budget, you know, earmarked $1.6 billion towards water and infrastructure, and that's important. It's a start. It's not a lot, I guess, in the greater scheme of things, but it helps us get there. I think there needs to be a consistent commitment to infrastructure funding by the provincial level of government. We're very blessed to have in Markham $57 million for, as part of the HAF funding. That is going to go a long ways. Our goal is to build 1,600 homes in the next 3 years. So I'm not waiting 10 years. I'll get this done in 3 years. So 1,600 homes in 3 years. So we're ready to go. The 905 is absolutely ready for growth and development. We need the support of senior levels of government to advance infrastructure now. All of this work around the EA processes and the back and forth and the waiting for growth, like that's got to stop. Like let's get on with the business. Let's not stop tinkering on the edges, talking about fourplexes and accessory units and all of these kind of things. Let's actually get a lot of growth, a lot of development happening, and the 905, the 519, there's a lot of opportunities out there, but we need the infrastructure. Because you know what happens? You know what happens, Sabine, when you pass an MZO and you forget that you need infrastructure to make that growth happen? Well, we all been through that, right? We know what happens. We can't do that. We can't lose sight of the fact that when you zone, when you plan communities, get that infrastructure in.
Okay. So look, I want to dig into a couple of the things we thought. Everybody's talking about infrastructure. You know, we hear talking about delivering it in different ways. We hear about service corporations, regions. Is it just about money? Is it about governance? What do you think? And you know, not to put you on the spot, but you know, you've all talked about infrastructure. I mean, Arvin, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not so, you know, honestly, we can talk about governance and hundreds of reasons why we don't do things. There's a lot of excuses. The bottom line is we need sustained funding to cities so that we can get this infrastructure in place. That is the number one thing. And I guess the second aspect of that is let's eliminate all the processes. I use environmental assessment process as one example, but there's just too much bureaucracy. You know, I want to put a big pipe somewhere. It's the bureaucracy is unreasonable, absolutely unreasonable. We should be thinking about the supply of housing and the fact it's needed.
Can I just note that I had to come to 10 Meet the Chief's dinners to hear a chief planner say there's too much unreasonable bureaucracy. I mean, my Lord, take me now.
Should I announce my retirement tonight?
I can die happy. What else? What do you think, Carla?
I mean, we're wrangling a lot of complexity. And so 100% we need financial support, 100% we need streamlined process, and then I return to partnerships. As we consider the order of magnitude change, like part of the area where I work in is the city's waterfront. We're building the equivalent of a medium-sized municipality growing on the city's waterfront. And so the complexity of delivering that infrastructure really requires dedicated resources from all partners at the table so that we have as many minds as possible to get to the right solution quickly.
Yeah, we need a really good plan for financial sustainability for municipalities to get our infrastructure. Timing is critical to get the EAs approved. As one of the only upper tier municipalities here, there's a lot of change that's happening and coming our way, and I think the change just has to slow down and stop. We've been inundated with change, and we just have to get back to just doing the planning that we need to do. I'm really concerned about the long-term planning, comprehensive planning being lost at the upper tier. No problem with the approvals going to lower tier. I think that's absolutely important to move things faster through the system. But that comprehensive planning tied between growth and infrastructure is so important that we can't lose sight of it, or we're going to be misaligned and the infrastructure is just not going to keep up with the housing that we need to build and get in the ground quickly.
I know there's a lot of support for the idea that there's just been a huge volume of change lately. I think one of the key performance indicators of that is the rumor that was going around that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs was about to be renamed Policy Discount Warehouse. How do we do it? Volume. But quite apart from that, I mean, Steve, what's your take on all of this?
No, I was just thinking, late last week, we finally got a decision from the OLT on our 2009 council-adopted Urban Hamilton official plan. The final appeal has been resolved. 15, 20 years later, we've resolved it. And it's gone through growth plans and Greenbelt plan updates and PPS changes. And just when you think you have a bit of stability and you know what you're planning for, changes come again, whether it's density targets or lands coming out of the Greenbelt and lands going back into the Greenbelt. And in Hamilton's case, no urban boundary expansion, urban boundary expansion, back to no urban boundary expansion. Then you have to stop everything you're doing, redo all your infrastructure master plans, update your development charges bylaw and your financial strategy, and just when you think you're about ready to start going, something changes again, and then you're right back to square one. And that, every time I have to take resources off of those projects, it means other projects aren't advancing, and that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is recognizing that between reurbanization is different than greenfield when we're talking about infrastructure. Very often when we're talking about infrastructure, people are thinking about water, wastewater. They lose sight of the stormwater issue. You go into an older city like the city of Hamilton, we have combined sewer systems. We're dealing with MOECP and how they treat combined sewer systems, and then there's huge constraints there on growth. You have changing standards. You have a sewer in the road, it's servicing X number of units. Suddenly somebody wants to come and do something, and they're saying, well, there's no capacity. And everyone is looking, well, what do you mean there's no capacity? There's a sewer in the road, and they're saying, no, the parameters have changed. So we have to re-engineer and reconsider what we're dealing with. It's those kind of transactional changes that end up causing delays in projects. And that's one of the things that I think we're finding most frustrating to deal with. We don't know really what we're planning for on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Now, I know Mayor Marion Mead Ward is here. Ontario Big City Mayors has talked a lot about the need for sustainable funding on the infrastructure side. We just had the budget yesterday. There was some good news in it, but what do you guys think from a dollars and a fiscal rebalancing as between the province and municipalities? What do you think that's going to look like in 10 years if we're going to be successful?
I think it's a good start. I mean, the announcement yesterday was a step in the right direction, but it's not enough. It's geared to municipalities who are meeting targets for the most part, it seems. Not upper tiers who put big billion-dollar infrastructure in the ground. And I'm worried that, we're going to miss that financial sustainability for those who are putting the infrastructure in place.
I think building on Paul's comment, one of the things is, as municipalities, we're enablers, right? I can pre-zone a site. That gives you permission to apply for a site plan. That gives you permission to come in for a building permit. But it's the private sector partners who make that determination whether or not they are coming in for a building permit and when are they going to come in for that building permit. And then when does that building permit translate into a housing start as CMHC goes out and says there's a housing start. And that's one of the challenges that we have as a municipality in terms of dealing especially with those housing targets and the linkages between those targets and the funding. We've done a lot of work on the zoning to allow for tens of thousands of units to be built, but it's up to the landowner and the private sector to actually exercise on those planning permissions, and why aren't they doing that? So earlier this week I was at the Home Builders Conference, and they were saying it's the interest rates, it's the market conditions, it's the lack of sales. So they feel that 2024 is still going to be a very difficult year, even though as a municipality we have done everything we can essentially to roll out the red carpet to make that development happen. It's still the landowner's choice.
Yeah, I think just building on Paul's point also, I think the long-term sustainability for infrastructure is very important. We need a long-term game plan. What's the roadmap? So, yeah, great announcement yesterday. We're all very happy, fine. But municipalities need to know. We cannot be stuck on our own when it comes to development. We always say growth needs to pay for growth, and that's fine. But that infrastructure, the sustainable infrastructure, over the long term, there needs to be that commitment. There needs to be a roadmap. The feds, the province, they need to come up with a roadmap. If we're serious about building the amount of homes that the feds want, now they're giving the province heck for not meeting the targets, and the province is giving municipalities heck because you know what? Only 50% of municipalities met the targets last year, right? So what's stopping that from happening? We're talking about, well, some of us, like I didn't meet the target, Markham, right? So what went wrong? We didn't have enough development in the pipeline and so forth. But really, we need to take a longer-term approach. Next 10 to 20 years, how do we lay the groundwork for growth? What's the infrastructure that's required? What is the investment in transit? Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to make it happen? And maybe that's a role that the province can take on. We need a chief planner or somebody from this crowd at the province to take that on and say, you know what? This is how we're going to plan the province of Ontario moving into the future.
Well, one thing I always say is that while it's easy, as someone who's worked at MMAH, the hardest thing is to come up with planning rules that make sense across the province. And, I always say that it's always fun to complain about the province, but it's actually much more realistic to sympathize with the incredible regional diversities of the province and recognize just how difficult it is to meet the varying needs of varying communities. And so we're sensitive to the point you were just making. You just wanted to jump in.
I was just going to say, in the circumstance where housing targets are met or exceeded, so in different, Toronto circumstances different, we're thrilled by that success, and we're thrilled to invest in it. We're real worried about the pace of transit and hard infrastructure coming online. So just the infrastructure story is a baseline no matter what end of the spectrum you're at in terms of target meeting. And then we're talking a lot about hard infrastructure here, but the other thing that I'm thinking about is we're also coming out of COVID. We're all talking amongst ourselves because we're so happy to be out of our rooms and out of our boxes and like interacting with real people. And so the human services cost that municipalities are bearing is really significant too. And if we're talking about housing, we have to think about the supports that people need as well.
Well, can we just build on that? Because you said, one of your key indices of success would be whether your kids would be able to afford a place that wasn't your basement. And that's
I want them out of my basement, yes.
That is no laughing matter. I mean, what do you think affordability is going to look like in 10 years? And what is it going to have to look like if we're going to be able to look in the mirror and say we've been successful?
There's no easy solution. There's no doubt about it. And I think the same scenario affects everybody in this room. We think about our kids and how they're going to be able to afford to live and where in the city or elsewhere. And it's, as I said, I think every single level of government, the development industry, we all have to get creative. We have to think outside the box to find different formats of housing, federal programs to get back into the game that they used to be in 30 years ago. These programs and these incentives, we have to all put our heads together to find those solutions.
Yeah, that creativity is very important. We heard that the feds are going to provide us with some kind of like the post-war housing designs. How can we create a lot of housing, standardize the designs, get them done fast? I had someone talk to me the other day about building housing on the fringe of the Greater Toronto Area, $499,000. I said, how the heck are you going to do that? He said, no basements, no garages, but a spectacular kitchen. I said, you know what, not bad. So, there's ways to really up the game on affordability. We need creativity at our level. We need creativity with the developers, and we need affordable infrastructure.
So look, our time is fast running out. You guys all have the reputation for being people that developers want to work with. That's one of the reasons why you're on the panel. Just in sort of like one phrase or what's the best advice you have for the people that are out there that need to work with planners? There's a lot of chiefs in this room. What's the best advice you have for the best way to get the best results when we work together? Maybe I'll start with you, Steve.
I think it's to have that open and transparent dialogue, to be honest, what the actual expectations are. What are your timelines? When do you need to have certain things delivered? And doing that sort of business case analysis. The fastest way to build something is to build as of right as per the existing zoning, the vision that's laid out. If that doesn't work for you and you want to propose an alternative development, then to recognize it's going to take a lot of time. There may be issues with it. So really, but if you want to go there, tell us, what are your timelines, the degree of seriousness you're associating with it, and the resources that are going to be required for it. Because it can be very expensive, and I don't think people appreciate that when they get into that process.
Arvin?
Embrace, accept technology. And the reason I say that is we started an e-plan system in Markham. All our applications are electronic, no more rolling the cart with the plans to the front counter. Generally it was supportive, but there are some developers that resisted it. No reason to resist technology. Technology will save us. The innovation that Paul's talking about, it'll be technology that'll save us. The industry, construction industry worldwide, is one of the laggards in adopting technology. We can change that here.
Paul?
I think it's about us all recognizing each other's perspectives and working together. I joked about complete applications earlier, but the municipalities need to be realistic about what they need to make a decision. You don't need the moon. Think about that. Developers, same thing, complete applications that we can all work together, move quickly through the system. It's about understanding each other and working together.
And Carly, last word to you.
Come and talk with us. If you can, come through the open door. Come through the process that we've established as best you can, even if it's not perfect in that moment. And then that gives us the best pathway to get you going speedily down the track that we are collectively trying to go towards.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is your 10th anniversary Meet the Chief Planner panel. Will you give them a big hand, Colin?